Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is criticize. Let's take a moment and look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The most common way for people to use the verb criticize is to mean that someone is indicating the faults, mistakes, or errors of someone or something, and they're doing it in a rather negative or disapproving way. So sometimes people might criticize you by speaking, right, with their words, pointing out you're doing this wrong, you need to do it better. But it could also be done in writing. Sometimes in certain jobs, people receive written performance evaluations. And there might be sentences or statements, again, pointing out mistakes, errors, or things that could just be improved upon. A second way the verb criticize gets used is in connection to literary or artistic work. And again, here, this is where someone is expressing judgment or an opinion. Do they think this is a good piece of literature or a good piece of art, or do they think it's bad? And what are the reasons for that? With this second definition, you're probably more likely to hear it in an academic setting. So if you're taking literature classes, art classes at a collegiate level, then you might encounter the verb in those courses. But for now, you should know that criticize is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, I'm going to drop the E before I add ing. And that's because this word ends with the pattern of vowel consonant E. The progressive form is pronounced criticizing. Criticizing. Okay? To make the past tense or participle forms, all I need to do is add the letter D since this verb ends in an E. Now the base verb, criticize, ends in a voiced Z sound. Right? This means that our ed ending is just going to make a D sound, and we're not going to add an extra syllable as we say it. So it should sound like this: criticized, criticized. Okay? You might be happy to know there are no additional phrasal verbs that we need to study or discuss. So now we can move on and practice using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today I thought we would practice the past progressive and the present progressive. Now, both of these progressive verb tenses are also sometimes called the continuous, and that is just fine. If your teacher or your textbook uses the word continuous, that's great. But just know progressive, continuous, and used in this way in connection to English grammar, they're going to mean the same thing. We're first going to talk about the past progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that was in progress, right? Something that was continuing during a period in the past. And the reason I like saying past progressive is I want to help my students remember that we need two parts to make our verb. So here I'm going to use a past form of be. So that's was or were, and then I'm going to use the ing form of the verb. So I have to pay attention to my subject, right? So if my subject is I, he, she, or it, I'm going to use was, W-A-S, and then I'll use the ing form of my verb. But if my subject is you, we, or they, I'll use were, W-E-R-E, and then the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at the affirmative example. The fan was criticizing the player's injured teammate. I saw this sentence used in an article kind of talking about some athlete kind of verbally attacked this fan. And why was it happening, right? This was an action that was ongoing. The fan was criticizing a teammate. Now, if you want to make a negative past progressive sentence, again, we start with our subject. We use was or were, whichever form matches that subject. But then we use not before the ing form of the verb. Okay? Now, you might hear the contractions wasn't for was not or weren't for were not used. It's actually here in my example sentence. They weren't really applauding him, but they weren't criticizing his statement either. So, again, here we're talking about an action that was not ongoing or not continuing. So, in this sentence, it's sort of noting, right, that some group of people, they, right, they're not cheering him on, encouraging him, applauding, right? But they're also not saying anything negative. So they're kind of in the middle, right? That's the idea that's being communicated with this sentence. Finally, let's talk about making a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, I start with was or were, then I'm going to use my subject, and then the ing form of the verb. An example of this. Was he always criticizing his students in class? So again, we're asking if this action was ongoing during this particular point in the past. Now let's move on to the present progressive. Again, you'll notice two P's in the name of our verb tense. That's going to help us remember we need two parts to our verb. So in the present, our forms of be are based on what our subject is. So if my subject is I'm going to use am. If my subject is you, we, or they, I'll use are, A-R-E. And then if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use is. And then after one of those forms of be, I use the ing form of my verb. And the reason I use this verb tense is to describe an action that is happening right now, or an action that is in progress during a period time that has not been completed yet. So let's take a look at an affirmative example. We have movie fans are criticizing the historical inaccuracies in the film. So again, they're kind of pointing out those mistakes, saying this is what's wrong. And here the idea of criticizing, it's probably being done on social media. So on X, formerly Twitter, or maybe on Facebook or Instagram, something else, right? They're posting critical comments. That would be another way to think about that. So here we're describing an action that's happening right now, an action that is continuing. Now, if you want to make a negative present progressive sentence, again, we always start with our subject. We use a present form of be, then not, and then the ing form of the verb. Now, I can take are not and make the contraction aren't. I can take is not and make the contraction isn't, but I cannot make a contraction with am not. Okay, so don't try and combine those. Let's take a look at another negative example. They aren't criticizing his staff because they don't make the policies. So again, we're talking in the negative, an action that is not ongoing. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present progressive. To do this, I start with my present form of be, whichever form matches my subject, and that comes next. Then I use the ing form of the verb. Here's my last example. Is she criticizing employees' performance this week? Right? The week's not over, right? So that's a reason we would see present progressive being used. Now, let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb criticize. And the first word we're going to discuss today is the noun criticism. Criticism. I know this can be a difficult word to pronounce. It's come up recently in some of my classes, so I'm going to say it one more time. Criticism. This noun can have a couple different meanings like our verb. So one way it gets used is to talk about someone expressing their disapproval of another person or another thing based on this idea that they see faults, they see mistakes, or maybe some errors. An example of this might be, he's received a lot of criticism for the way he handled the dispute. So here we're talking about the way someone handled maybe an argument, a disagreement of some kind, right? And people are going, oh, you didn't do that well. You should have done this, or you should have done that. Now, a second way the noun criticism gets used is to refer to, again, that analysis or judgment in connection to literary or artistic work. So literature or some other form of art. An example of this might be, the professor just won an award for the best literary criticism of 2023. Now, let's talk about another related word. That's the noun critic. Critic. And again, like our verb, it can have a couple different meanings. So a critic could be someone who expresses a rather unfavorable opinion, a negative opinion of someone or something. An example of this. Critics of the expansion project are worried about the environmental impact. Okay. So this sentence suggests someone has proposed expanding maybe a building, a business, something of that nature, right? Making it bigger, making it larger. But there are people who are going, no, 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 this is a bad idea. And they're giving reasons connected to the environment, right? So they're saying, don't do this, don't expand. Okay. Now, a second way you hear the noun critic used is to refer to a person who judges the merits of any kind of literary work, artistic, musical, and especially they might be doing it in a professional capacity. So sometimes newspapers, magazines, other broadcasting networks might employ someone whose job it is to read certain books, watch certain movies, etc., and tell people, is this good or is it not so good? So an example of this might be, music critics say that this is the band's best album in 10 years. Okay, so here we're likely referring to the professional reviewers of, again, artistic work. One last word for us to discuss today, it's the adjective critical. This adjective can have a couple different meanings. One might be to express some adverse or disapproving comments or judgments. An example of this might be, their supervisor has been very critical of the way they talk to customers. So here, the supervisor might say, no, 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 that's not how to speak to customers. You need to be more polite. You need to say please. You need to say thank you, right? They're pointing out the mistakes or faults. Another way to use the adjective critical could mean that something has the potential to become disastrous or even result in death. Or another related definition here might be of crucial importance. I have a couple sentences here to help us with this last meaning. So an example of critical might be, she has been in critical condition since the accident. You might hear this term used in connection, again, to how someone is doing in the hospital. That's going to connect back to that, there's the possibility of resulting in death. So another way to think of this, a very serious situation. I hope you won't need that term, but in case you hear it, now we might know just how serious their medical condition is. But another example, maybe you've had somebody say your assistance or your help is critical. It means it is very, very important. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.